Welcome to this week's edition of the Construction CPA's Coffee Cafe. I am the Construction CPA, Lisa Raish. We are dropping the hammer on cash flow problems so you can build things that matter. So this week's topic, we're going to be talking about payroll and the pitfalls of related to payroll and how to avoid them. So what are we going to really be talking about? We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the difference between a W-2 employee and a 1099 worker. We're going to spend some time talking a little bit about compliance, some of the issues that you might run into. And we're going to also give you some tips about some of the more construction-friendly payroll services out there. You do want to have someone who kind of understands construction when you are looking for a service to support you. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And you want to make sure you want to be able to get it right. There can be audits you could potentially be liable for, penalties and interest associated with having people incorrectly classified. And honestly, you also may strain your overall relations with your team, right? Or the people that are working for you. So you just want to make sure you're clear on kind of what the differences are and making sure that you are, in fact, classifying people appropriately. So what are we talking about? So there's going to be a difference between a W-2 and a 1099 worker. What we see a lot of times is there is a generality that is used where everyone's considered a quote unquote employee, where in fact they may not be. So what are the differences between the two? So there are going to be some legal differences between them. So your W-2 person is going to be considered an employee. They work for you, they get a paycheck, typically weekly, bi-weekly, however often you pay payroll. They get something called a W-2 from you at year end. That's an employee. Now, your independent contractor or your subcontractor is going to get paid when they bill you. And at the end of the year, and only at the end of the year, you are required to file something called a 1099, which provides them with a summary of all the dollars that you paid them during the year. So from a compliance perspective, they're two very different things, but really the biggest thing that you want to look at when you're looking at both an employee and an independent contractor is something called a control test. Now, there are a couple of different control tests. The IRS has a control test. The Department of Labor has a control test. What we're really going to be, and they're going to be slightly different. Unfortunately, they're not the same identical kind of requirements. What we're going to basically be talking about is the IRS control test, which is going to revolve around how much control that you have over what that person does and when they do it. So do you have control over their behavior, where they have to be somewhere, when they have to be there? Is there a certain level of financial control associated with it? And that will ultimately define the type of relationship that you have with them. So for example, I would typically say if you're telling someone at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning they need to be in your office at their desk doing the items that you say is required, and then they go out onto job sites and they're in your truck and in your t-shirt, and you tell them when you're going out, they're going out on those job sites, you have a level of control associated with that. When it comes to a sub or an independent contractor, that individual is, I am building a house. I need a plumber. I need plumbing work done. And, we need it done roughly in this particular week. And the plumber comes. When they come, they have their own people that work for them. There's not as much of a level of control associated with when they come to do the work. There is a little bit, but again, there's some flexibility there. And then at the end of the job, they send you an invoice and you pay the invoice. So there's some legalities that you want to make sure that you are aware of, because that is one of the things that really could potentially get you if you aren't clear on the type of people that you have. And unfortunately, the word employee is used across the board kind of as a generic term and not necessarily as a proper legal term. So there are going to be some payroll and some tax implications associated with the two different things. So your W-2 employee, you're going to be paying something called payroll taxes as the employer. You possibly will be offering benefits, maybe retirement, maybe healthcare, maybe some other types of benefits. There are going to be wage-related laws in the state or the county that you're in that you're going to need to be compliant with. So there are specifics related to a W-2. Now, a 1099, that person is going to be liable for their own taxes. they're going to have to file taxes and potentially pay taxes themselves at year end. It's not your obligation as the company that is utilizing their services. You don't have to pay them benefits, so you're not giving them health care or retirement or anything like that. And basically, they should be giving you an invoice at the end of their work for you to pay. So again, two very different relationships. Your W-2 is going to be paid weekly, bi-weekly, however that pace of payroll is, whereas your 1099 typically is going to get paid once they complete the work and they give you the invoice for the work and then you pay that. So a little bit of difference between a W-2 and a 1099, and there are also different tax implications associated with it as well. So people tend to misclassify the two. Like I said, they use the word employee interchangeably. I've seen clients use the word contractor interchangeably. You're using these 1099 individuals probably for regular work or supervised work. So again, that 1099 is not, that you have no control over what that person is doing. That's one of the things that you need to make sure that you're very clear on. There are risks. So there are potentially IRS risks. So if you do actually misclassify someone, you take the chance that if, for example, if you were to be audited and they are not classified correctly, they could potentially get reclassified, which means if they weren't a sub and they actually are employees, at that point you would be subject to to payroll taxes and then penalties and interest on the payroll taxes. So again, costs associated with that, potential back taxes. No one wants to do that. And there's also, when you reclassify a worker, there could also be things like workers' comp, insurance related adjustments to your policy, your premiums, et cetera. So you want to make sure, these are common things that you can misclassify, right? Everybody's a 1099. That may in fact not be the case. They may in fact really be employees because you're controlling what it is they do. You're paying them on a regular, regular basis, again, weekly, biweekly, et cetera. So that tends to be the most common one that happens, is that people get misclassified as 1099s when they're in fact an actual employee, but there could potentially be some additional costs associated if they are misclassified and they are reclassified. There could really be some additional costs that you may be liable for. So it could get costly. So you want to make sure you review that prior to bringing people on so you classify them appropriately right out of the gate. Like any other business, you want to make sure, kind of from a best practices perspective, you want to use written contracts. If they're an employee, you have an employee contract. If they're a sub and you're using them on projects, it's like any other sub relationship. You want to have a contract with them that outlines the work that they are in fact going to do for you. It's very clear as to who they are, what they do for you. An employment contract is clearly going to state that you're an employee, so on and so forth. Again, the same thing for a subs contract. So you've got it written out. There's no ambiguity there where someone could say, oh, I am actually an employee. Like, no, the contract clearly states. And so you're very clear, like everything else, just like that contract you have with your customer. You're clear about what it is that each individual is doing and why they're doing it, who's liable for what. Same thing with your employment contract or even your contract with your subs. You do want to periodically review individual roles and responsibilities. Make sure that, what you say people are doing is in fact what they're doing. The job titles align with what they're doing, so on and so forth, especially if they're an employee. And this is one of these areas where I do recommend that you seek professional guidance. If you are not sure, this could be a very expensive area if you run into challenges. So in some cases, it does make sense to actually seek out legal guidance to ensure that you've classified people appropriately and that you're not running into any challenges where you've misclassified somebody and now it's costing you even more to get them reclassified because, for example, you find out in some type of IRS audit that you misclassified these individuals. So again, doing the work in advance kind of dotting your I's and crossing your T's prior to anything potentially happening is typically a far cheaper way to go than, unfortunately, having something happen on the backside. So, seek legal counsel, especially when it comes to determining the type of individual that person is. So you want to make sure that you're clear and everyone's roles and responsibilities are clear. So, labor, there's always going to be compliance issues. Construction can be a little bit different than other industries. So, you're going to have things like prevailing wage and certified payrolls, especially if you're working on any type of federal or state government project. These public works types of projects, you need to have a payroll certified by the payroll company. It has to have accurate classification of the workers and the minimum wage that they're paid. So you want to make sure this can be a sticky one. So you do want to make sure that you are aware of what your responsibilities as a business owner are, especially in this area. This could could turn very expensive if something were misclassified or you are not compliant with specific types of filings in this when it comes to prevailing wage, especially. Overtime and break compliance is always an issue with any industry, but you want to make sure that you understand the state or the county or the jurisdiction you're working in. It does vary state to state. There is no kind of one size fits all across the board when it comes to states. So you do, especially in construction, we find that clients are going over the border into other states, and it might be one thing in the state that you're in, you go, just right over the border and you're like, and it's completely different. So you just want to make sure you're aware of what the rules are. For example, places like, unfortunately, California can be a world of its own when it comes to payroll compliance. And so what's compliant in California may not be what is on the federal level. So you want to make sure you're aware of what, those types of things mean in the jurisdiction that you're in. You always want to track your hours accurately for everyone on your team, especially your field workers, especially if you are in some sort of prevailing wage situation. So you want to make sure that you're clearly, and then from a financial and a job perspective, you want to track those hours, you want to track them accurately so that you can in fact tie them back to a job you're working on and track your costs. So really tracking those payroll hours isn't just to pay people. It's going to be used in a number of different ways. So it is important that you have a solid, accurate, and clear way to track that, pay people appropriately, and then trace it back to specific jobs that you're working on. Another big one is workers' comp insurance. Now, I do know workers' comp is not required in all states, but many of the states it is. And so when you're classifying the difference between that W-2 employee and that 1099 contractor, you want to make sure you're clear. So that 1099 contractor is typically going to have their own insurance coverage, their own workers' comp coverage. So when you are going through your workers' comp insurance and your audits on an annual basis, you're getting a certificate of insurance from your subs to prove to your workers' comp company that these individuals are covered and you don't have to cover them under your plan. So you want to make sure that it's very clear as to who the 1099 is and isn't. If your 1099 doesn't have their own workers' comp or their own insurances, their own liability, are they really a 1099? Are they really a sub? Do you really have control over what they're doing? Most other 1099s, businesses, et cetera, are going to have their own insurances. And so those are the things that you're going to want to keep track of, especially when you bring the subs on board. As part of your onboarding process, before you pay them that first time, you get that certificate of insurance, you get that contract you have with them signed. So now you know that they have their own insurance. When you are audited on an annual basis for workers' comp, again, you can prove that these individuals are not, in fact, employees. They are subcontractors. They have their own insurance. And then the only people that are getting covered under your workers' comp are the people who actually work for you. So there can be gaps there that you want to make sure that you're very, very aware of. And it can be quite costly if you are not clear on the different types. And if your 1099s don't in fact have their own insurance, they will lump those people into your workers' comp policies. And therefore your overall premium costs on an annual basis will shift because now you're paying for the 1099 subs that you have that don't in fact have their own insurance. Record keeping, you always want to keep track of, you want your records to be good, clean, clearly easy to follow. So these are going to be your time cards, however they are. In most cases, a lot of those are now electronic. A lot more of the softwares have apps where team members can sign in on the app, so on. There's typically geo tracking on them. So they sign in, they need to be geo tracked at the actual site that they should be working on. So they're not, signing in 30 minutes away in the car. They sign in once they actually arrive on site, things like that. That's important for you to keep track of. Keeping your wage statements, keeping your payroll records, keeping payroll records for a significant period of time. It's your responsibility as a business owner to retain these records. Again, you don't have to retain them in paper format, but you do want to make sure that you keep copies of all of these, your time cards, your payroll reports, your W-2s, your 1099s. There are standards as a business owner that you need to maintain when it comes to keeping track of your documentation. This isn't just a payroll issue or like a 1099 issue. This is, as a business owner, you need to keep clear records that you can go back and track back to should you need to prove something down the road. So a couple of tips about choosing a contractor-friendly payroll provider. For example, if you are needing to do prevailing wage and you need to have what's called a certified payroll, not all of the payroll services do those. So you want to make sure when you are researching the best one to support you that they understand or they work with construction. Industry knowledge, like anything else, is going to matter in this particular area because there are going to be compliance requirements that you're going to need to maintain. So you want to make sure that you know that they offer payroll to construction. They understand the compliance associated with it. We're finding more and more providers now that are construction specific. So one of them is a company called eBacon. They specialize entirely in payroll for construction. They speak payroll, they speak construction, they understand prevailing wage, they understand that you need to be able to assign your team's cost to specific projects. It's not just getting someone paid every week, it's all of the things associated with keeping track of that payroll. So you want someone who understands the industry, not just someone who actually processes payroll. And again, you want to if you need certified payrolls for prevailing wage or for union benefits, or you are tracking your job costing, it's important that your provider knows what construction is and understands the compliance associated with it so that you can not just get people paid every week, but you can get the reporting out of it that you need for the other things that you're looking to do with those payroll numbers. Some of the things you want to look for: mobile tracking. It's becoming more and more common now. More of these providers have apps. So again, you can sign in on your app when you get to the job site. It geo-locks it. It tells you exactly where you are so that, again, as I mentioned, you're not signing in 30 minutes before when you're in the car and you're still, 20 miles away. They'll geo-lock it as to where you are for you to sign in and then sign out, right? You're going to want job costing. You want to be able to track that. So you want to be able to track that maybe someone went to one job site in the morning and then another one in the afternoon. So you want to be able to allocate the hours that individual had at both of those jobs to the specific job. So you want to be able to job cost with your payroll service. You want to make sure that there's some level of integration with your accounting software. The more people you have, the more jobs you're working on, the more complex the payroll becomes, the more complex the recording of the payroll entries into your financial systems, your job costing systems, et cetera, becomes vital and incredibly important. So you really want some level of integration, and you want a good solid integration between the two, so that you don't have your accounting, your finance, your payroll person doing a lot of manual activity in order to get that information recorded into your financial systems or into your job costing system, right? Those are the kinds of things that are really, really important. You also want to be able to customize reports in these systems. So there are going to be standard reports that you'll always use, but there'll be times you'll want to look at things specific type of information. Can I get a customizable report where I can look at just this thing or just that thing? So those are the types of things when you're looking for a payroll service, can I get the one-off things out of it easily versus These are the only reports I can get, the standard, 5, 10, whatever reports. I'd like to run some different reports here and there. So there are things that you do want to ask a payroll service when you are looking to sign up with them to ensure that they understand not just construction, but if you are maybe in a specialized construction. So you want to ask them what kind of construction clients do they actually serve. There are going to be different reporting requirements between the different types of construction. It's not a one size fits all like anything else. So you do want to make sure that if you are one type of construction company and maybe you're a roofing company and all they do is serve residential contractors, is that really going to align with what you need? Do you need somebody who actually works more with roofers, right? Again, little questions that you want to be able to ask when you are looking for that right service, so that moving payroll services can be painful sometimes. So you want to make sure when you make that move, you're making the right move and you're making a move to the best option for you, because it will fulfill all the needs that you have. You want to make sure that they can handle prevailing wage, certified payrolls. Can they handle multi-state? So you've got people going over state lines. There are parts of the country where, the state lines are very close to each other. So you could be in a place where you could be very close to three or four different states, and you could have team going all over the place. So do you have the capacity to track that and make sure you're remitting appropriately in each one of those states? You also want to find out if that payroll service can support you with 1099, because that is also very helpful if they can support you with keeping track of and paying your 1099 contractors, because then it's all in one place and then all the reporting is all done in one place at year end. So the W-2s come out of there for your employees, the 1099s come out of there. Can I do it all in one platform? Is it in multiple platforms? So it's helpful to be able to have them both in one place. So if you do have a payroll service that actually does support that 1099 feature, it's something to consider, because it will take another layer of compliance out of your office staff and then moves it into a payroll service that you're using throughout the year. So those are all basic, those are basic things that you want to think about when you're considering payroll. There are going to be some specialties for this industry. There are going to be things that are very specific to construction, but a lot of this is also specific to any type of business, right? Knowing the difference between that W-2 employee and that 1099 contractor. What are your legal obligations? Who's obligated for tax purposes? Have you misclassified someone? Are you compliant with the labor laws, the payroll laws in the state, the county, the jurisdiction you're operating out of? Are you aware? Do you understand prevailing wage and the difference between that and what a certified payroll is? Making sure that you're paying people appropriately for overtimes and breaks, and what are the rules in the states that you're in? Are you required to have workers' comp insurance? If you are, who does my workers' comp cover? Am I keeping track of good quality records? Are my time cards tracked regularly? Am I keeping my payroll records, my W-2s, my 1099s? That basic record keeping requirement is going to be standard across every company. That's not just going to be a construction company. And then when you're picking a payroll service, do they understand construction? Do they understand what prevailing wage is? Do they understand what a payroll, certified payroll is, right? What features are you looking for? Do I get mobile tracking? Do I get the geo tracking with the mobile tracking? Can I job cost? Can I get special reports out of it? Those are all things that you want to think about. And then you want to make sure that payroll provider, that you're asking them the right questions when you move over to that provider, so that you in fact get what you need out of it. So we look forward to seeing you here every week. Follow us here on Facebook, on Instagram, and YouTube. We are the Construction CPA at all three. I look forward to seeing you here every Friday. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week.